Ready? All right. Yeah. So here's a testimony for you guys. We get together at 8 o'clock here every Sunday morning. We have a kind of a team meeting for all the people that are going to be here serving in any capacity. If you'd like to join that, come see me after fellowship. We'll get you guys squared away. If you signed up for a group, you can come hang out with us. I say this because this morning, at the outset of our meeting, there was a thread started that has continued through worship, that has continued through testimony, that brings us to where we are right now. And that is obedience and patience. Not just general obedience and patience, although get my kids in here if that's the message, God. No. Obedience and patience to God's timing. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. God's timing is perfect. So patience, obedience, and God's timing. The whole of salvation is to rectify disobedience. Obedience and God's timing are tied together, not just tied, inextricably woven. You cannot separate in obedience and God's timing. And as we begin to discuss God's timing, we should just understand that God's has a much longer view of time than we do, which is, understandable. 2 Peter says, "Do not overlook one fact, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day." Okay, now, certainly not everything that God does is going to be on a 1,000-year timeline, and thank you for that, Father. Not that I'm not willing to step into somebody else's grace, but, you can make a promise to me and follow through on that, that's okay. And he does. But impatience cannot cohabitate with God's timing. And if we're not only to walk in the good works that God has before ordained for us, but we're also to receive all that God has planned for us, then we have to be patient and we have to be cognizant that God has timing of his own. Impatience can step on the design that God would have for us. And while it doesn't necessarily hamstring him, it does prevent us from stepping into the full promise that God has intended. And if you walk away from this day with one thing, the thing that I want you to walk away with is very simple. God's timing is perfect. And if you will be patient, you will see his glory. When it seems like an easy thing for us to get involved, that's when you should probably check your involvement against God's promise. When it seems like if I just got involved right now and just did this one thing, the whole thing would, all of this would just move faster, and then we could just move on to the next thing. But I'll just get involved, I'll just do this one thing, and then God can bring the rest of the glory. If you're going to say that, then you have to be willing to ask, is that really what God has designed, or am I stepping on God's promise and preventing something greater in the name of expediency? Now, hope is the reasonable expectation of God's goodness that will come, right? We know this. But sometimes our reason can only see to the end of the street. And if God's glory is down the street and around the corner, then our reason will see the end of the street and rationalize that is the goodness when it isn't. Does that make sense? Do we follow that? That track's good. Is this really what God has intended? Or am I stepping on his promise and preventing something greater in the name of expediency? In 1 Samuel chapter 13, we're going to have a look at a record of impatience. And we'll start in verse 12. We're going to start in verse 3. Right there. Jonathan defeated the garrison of the Philistines that was at Geba. And the Philistines heard of it, and Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And all Israel heard it and said that Saul had defeated the garrison of the Philistines. This is like the first bad game of telephone, because right there, Saul didn't defeat anybody. Saul defeated the garrison of the Philistines. No, I didn't. And also that Israel had become a stench to the Philistines. Did it say that? Did it say a stench? It didn't say a stench. Okay, well, that's fine. And the people were called to join Saul at Gilgal. And then we have a blank verse. And the Philistines mustered to fight with Israel 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and troops like the sand on the seashore in multitude. They came up and camped at Michmash and east of Bethaven. And when the men of Israel saw that they were in trouble, for the people were hard pressed, the people hid themselves in caves and holes and rocks and tombs and cisterns. And some of the Hebrews crossed the fords of the Jordan and into the land of Gad and Gilead, and Saul was still at Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. And he waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel. Now, Samuel is a prophet, and he's instructing Saul on spiritual matters. Okay, so at some point, Samuel said, wait 7 days. Saul has done that. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal. And the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, bring me the burnt offering, bring it here to me as a peace, bring me the peace offering. And he offered the burnt offering. And as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him and greet him. And Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me, and you didn't come within the days that you appointed, and the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines have come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord, so I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. You can almost see him in the room, psyching himself up in the mirror, right? Okay, Samuel, the priest, he's not here. People are leaving. The enemy is closing in fast. This is what I'm supposed to do, right? Yeah, I'm supposed to do this. This is the king move. This is the one this is where I make my decision. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Do it. Just do it. Do it. Verse 13, and Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord. Now, the commandment of the Lord to this point was that Saul was going to wait 7 days, and then when Samuel showed up, they were going to offer an offering to the Lord, and then there would be battle. Not when the enemy got there, not when all the people were leaving. When Samuel showed up after 7 days, then there would be an offering. But impatience stepped on that. Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly, and you have not kept the command of the Lord your God, with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over the people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. Man, the plan that God had required patience. God's plan was that Saul would have established a kingdom over Israel forever. But because of impatience, that couldn't happen. Now, Saul's kingship didn't just end here, okay? He did all right. He ruled another 40 years after that time. But that wasn't the design. God's design was that Saul would establish something greater than himself. What he did on his own was 40 years. What he could have done with God was a lifetime, a lineage. If you reason impatience and disobedience in your own mind, you will always come up with a legitimate reason why your actions, although wrong, are perfectly okay. I'm going to say that again. If you reason impatience and disobedience in your own mind, you will always come up with a legitimate reason why your actions, although wrong, are perfectly fine. We're going to skip that. When impatience kicks in, it's because there's a lack of trust, and that's it. Okay? There is a lack of trust that God will do what he says he's going to do. If he's made you a promise, he's going to do what he said he was going to do. So let's look at some records of God just doing that, okay? In Exodus chapter 6, God is talking to Moses, and he's getting ready to unleash the people from Egypt. And God says to Moses, "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham and to Isaac and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord." When God makes a statement like "I will" and "I am," we do not need to question that. Now, we all know what happened with the children of Israel, right? How many of them were left behind? 0. Did they all get out of Egypt? They sure did. Did they all make it to the promised land? Nope. But that's okay. We'll get into that next. God's timing is perfect. Exodus chapter 15. So, children of Israel out of Egypt. Okay, we're just going to track the children of Israel from like a 30,000-foot view. So they're out of Egypt. They set out from the Red Sea, and they went to the wilderness of Shur. So they've already crossed the Red Sea. They're separate, and they're out in the wilderness now. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Moriah, they could not drink the water because of Marah, the water of Marah, because it was bitter. Therefore, they named it Marah, which is the Hebrew word for bitterness. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "Well, what should we drink?" And he cried to the Lord. Moses cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and it became sweet. There the Lord made them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, "If you will diligently listen to the voice of your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer." Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the water. Throughout Exodus, we see the children of Israel become like professional world-class grumblers. And time after time after time, God continues to promise them that I will take care of you. I will be your healer. I will deliver you. I am your God. I feel like the surefire way to miss out on God's goodness and plan is to not recognize what he's doing when he's doing it. Like, if the children of Israel had journals and they could just write, like, God turned bitter water sweet. God gave us water from rocks. God made manna fall from the sky, and we're not quite sure what manna is, but it's good and it's keeping us alive. Like, if they'd have just wrote some of this stuff down, I feel like Canaan would have just been a day's travel, you know? But maybe not. So, children of Israel, much longer down the road, we're in Joshua now. The people of Israel walked for 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation of men of war who came out of Israel perished because they did not obey the voice of the Lord. They walked for 40 years because they couldn't listen, remember, and obey. God's promise for them was that they would come to a land that flowed with milk and honey. God was limited to what he could provide for them by way of manna and water because of disobedience. God was limited. He didn't not provide for them. He told them he was going to be their healer, and he said that I'm going to deliver you, and he said I'll bring you all the way to the land, and he did that. But he was limited in how quickly he could do that by their disobedience. They certainly walked in provision, but they did not walk in the planned provision. Okay? God has a planned provision for your life that is amazing, but it takes his time. Okay? All right. Okay. For the people of Israel walked for 40 years in the wilderness until all the nation, the men of war that came out of Egypt perished because they did not obey the voice of the Lord. The Lord swore to them that he would not let them see the land that the Lord had sworn to their fathers to give to us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So it was their children whom he raised up in their place. The Joshua circumcised, for they were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. It was his children that got to see that promise because it was the children that recognized what obedience looked like to God. It was the children that got to go into the land of milk and honey. I mentioned that God provided for the children of Israel. If you jump back in time a little bit to Deuteronomy in chapter 29, verse 2, it says, Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, you have not seen all the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants in the land, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs, those great wonders. But this day the Lord has given you a heart to understand, has not given you a heart to understand, nor eyes to see, nor ears to hear. I have led you 40 years in the wilderness. Your clothes have not worn out. Your sandals have not worn off your feet. I can't keep a pair of shoes for a year. And I don't walk a lot. Like, at all. Fitbit is like, are you still there? These guys walked in the wilderness for 40 years, and their shoes didn't wear out. Did God provide for them? Absolutely. You can't even question that. Did God provide for them the way he wanted to provide for them? Hard pass. Man, that's a bummer. Can you imagine what a land flowing with milk and honey must be like? Just comfy. Tasty. You have not eaten bread, and you've not drunk wine or strong drink, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. He provided for them the whole way without the luxury that he promised. Can we just take a minute to recognize that there's a difference between provision and plan? Like, plan is good always. Provision is good too, but there's a difference. There's a real noticeable difference. I just want you guys to just think on that a little bit. I don't have any more to say about it. It's just in the moment. You get that one for free. All right, let's go back to Joshua. We're just looking at records of God being God. He promised, right? He made a promise. He's fulfilling the promise. In chapter 6, Jericho was shut up inside and outside because the people of Israel. None went in and none came out. So the people of Israel were camped around the city of Jericho. And God told Joshua, I'm going to give you this land. And the Lord said to Joshua, I just said that, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and its mighty men of valor, and you shall march around the city, all the men of war, going around the city once a day. Thus shall you do for 6 days. Now that's an instruction, okay? And Joshua has two options here. He can obey, or he can disobey. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark, and on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people will shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him. This sounds like the same kind of language God was using earlier. Shall. It shall fall. It will fall. And everyone will go up straight before him. So Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark of the Lord. That's exactly what God told him to do. Somebody's getting it. Somebody's like, I saw my dad walking for a long time, and I'm not going to do that. I don't care how silly it sounds. All right, and he said to the people, go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord. And just as Joshua had commanded the people, the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets, and the ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. The armed men were walking before the priests who were blowing the trumpets, and the rear guard was walking after the ark while the trumpets blew continually. That's exactly what God told them to do. But Joshua commanded the people, you shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day that I tell you to shout, and then you'll all shout. Did he have to provide a reason? Doesn't seem like it. It seems like he gave an instruction and they followed it because God gave him an instruction and he followed it. So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going about it once, and they came into camp and spent the night in the camp. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. And the 7 priests, bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord, walked on, and they blew the trumpet continually, and the armed men were walking before them, and the rear guard was walking behind the ark, behind the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets blew continually. And on the 2nd day they marched around the city once, and they returned to the camp, and they did this for 6 days. On the 7th day they rose early at the dawn of the day, and they marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute, who helped them out earlier, and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you, keep yourselves from things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord, and they shall go into the treasury of the Lord." So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. And as soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall did what? Fell down flat. What did God say the wall was going to do? Fall down flat. Not crumble, fall down flat. What happened? The wall fell down flat. Joshua was given instructions that he followed. And as a result, God was able to walk out the plan that he had set for Joshua and the children of Israel. And it's at this time, when the wall comes down and Jericho falls, that the children of Israel begin to walk into the promised land that God gave them so many years before that. It's because of one man's obedience that the children of Israel, hold on, I'll make a correlation here. It's one man's obedience that the children of Israel were able to walk into the land of Canaan. And it's because of Jesus Christ's obedience that we are able to walk into the kingdom of heaven. If Joshua doesn't walk on day 5, what happens? The wall does not fall. If Joshua misses day 5 and then he's like, on day 6, we're just going to do 2 laps, God, the wall doesn't fall. If on day 7, they get 6 times around and Joshua's like, I think I lost count. Maybe we did 7. I don't know. Let's just stop. We're probably fine. We walked a lot. Does the wall fall down? No. The people were able to go into the captured city and take it the way God told them, the way God planned for them, because they obeyed. Obedience to God requires listening and patience. Now, fortunately for you guys, I mean, we have God's word, and there's records, just records on records on records in here about people obeying God. You're fortunate enough to also have a lead pastor. Woo! It's hitting me. That obeys well. So, I'm going to share with you a story. Garrett had an opportunity to share Jesus with somebody. Oh man. All right, Lord, let's pull it together. Like you and me, we gotta get these guys home. They're not gonna stand around watching me cry all day. I got time for God. All right, I love you too. Here we go. Garrett had an opportunity to share Jesus with someone that had a historical background with both Jesus and the scriptures in a very without the context of a relationship. They knew a lot about the Bible, but they didn't know what a relationship would look like. And so as a result, this person had a lot of questions and had come to some of their own assumptions about what a relationship with God looked like. Now, Garrett is a lead pastor. He's a great lead pastor. He spends a lot of time reading scriptures. Like, he reads them, and then he rereads them, and he does this a lot. And he knows stuff. He knows a lot, and he could answer questions. He could provide context to situations that people have questions about, right? Like, that's part of his job. He could do that really, really well. But instead, in this particular circumstance, he was patient to wait for God's direction on what to say and when. And then when given the green light, the conversation was a discussion, not a dictation, about God's redemptive love and its simplicity. Now, he could have chosen to answer every question, to explain every idea, and he may very well have spent the entirety of their time together running down theological rabbit holes, striving desperately to appear as the spiritual scholar, the guy with the answers. But instead, he focused on the goodness of God's love and what has been made available through Jesus Christ. Now, in this particular situation, that led to a very productive conversation for this person. Impatience would have been trying to prove God. Patience is God proving himself. When we acknowledge God's timing, it helps us to see the fullness of God's timing. And that helps our trust grow. Writing things down is a great idea. I recommend everybody do that because there's going to be a time in your life where you feel like a crisp $100 bill. And then there's going to be the day after when you are feeling like a handful of dirty pennies. And it's always good to write down when you're feeling great because you can go back and you can look at why you feel great. What did God do to put me in that position? What did God do to my headspace so that I could recognize his goodness and feel that way? This is what Psalms is, basically. Like, I don't know if you've ever read Psalms outside of like a song cadence, but it's David's journal, right? Let's look at Psalm 9. Check this out. The chief musician, set for possibly a soprano's voice. This is in the Amplified version. David writes, I will praise you, O Lord, with my whole heart. I will show forth, I will recount and tell aloud all your marvelous works and wonderful deeds. I will rejoice in you and be high in spirit. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. When my enemies turned back, they stumbled and perished before you, for you have maintained my right and my cause. You sat on the throne judging righteously. Does this sound familiar? That's the same thing God promised Moses, that he would judge righteously on the behalf of the children of Israel. And here's David recalling that very same behavior in thanks to God. You have rebuked nations. You have destroyed the wicked. You have blotted out their names forever. The enemy has been cut off and vanished in everlasting ruins. You have plucked up and overthrown their cities. The very memory of them has perished and vanished. When was the last time you had a problem that God took care of in such spectacular fashion that you literally forgot about it? Yeah. Let's see some. If that's never happened to you, guess what? It's possible. Yeah, come on. All right? God will just take it away. Somebody else will have to remind you of that problem you faced. But the Lord shall remain and continue forever. He has prepared and established his throne for judgment, and he will judge the world in righteousness, in rightness, and in equity. He will minister justice to the peoples in uprightness. The Lord also will be a refuge and a high tower for the oppressed, a refuge and a stronghold in times of trouble, in times of high cost, in times of destitution, in times of desperation. That is when God is a stronghold. And they who know your name, God, who have experienced an acquaintance with your mercy, God, will lean on and confidently put their trust in you. For you, Lord, have not forsaken those who seek and inquire of and for you. You are not forgotten. Your God is acutely aware of who you are and acutely aware of his plan for you and acutely aware of the perfect timing for you in that plan. There's a church in Tulsa called Transformation Church, and their pastor is Michael Todd, and he said this: "Your feelings matter. They just can't rule you. You cannot be more obedient to your feelings than you are to the God of your future, Jireh. Your feelings say, well, I don't like this. I can do better. This is the way it should be done. And if you obey them, you won't show up in a place where you are the answer. You'll be in a position where you're supposed to go and be the answer, but your feelings will prevent that." Ephesians 2, chapter 2, verse 10 says, "You are his masterpiece. You are God's masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus unto good works that he planned for you to walk in." God's plans for you are perfect. God's timing for you is perfect. You were made for significance. You were made for purpose. You were made to direct the people around you toward a perfect, powerful God. And if you will be patient, his goodness is worth it. Amen? God, you are so good. We love you. Thank you for speaking to our hearts. Your timing is perfect, God. Thank you for making us comfortable in your power. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. I love you guys. Have a great day.